Towards a New Socialism. Section: State Demand for Foreign Currency. Socialist states traditionally have gone to great lengths to acquire capitalist currency. Their motivation is the wish for funds to pay for imports of both producer and consumer goods. The state plan generally included a budget for imports of capital equipment and for articles destined for final consumption. One of the problems that planners faced is that they were unable to predict what the prices of imports will be by the time that they are purchased. There is an element of uncertainty in all planning, but at least for a domestic plan, it is in principle possible to pre-compute the requirements and outputs of different industries because these industries are subject to centralized control. Foreign suppliers are outside the planning system, and the prices that they will demand in 3 years' time are unknowable. In some cases, it may be possible to negotiate long-term fixed-price supply contracts, but these will be the exception. If trade with capitalist countries becomes too large, the uncertainties this introduces into the planning process can start to undermine economic stability. This is especially the case if the plan comes to depend upon imported industrial equipment, which later becomes unavailable due to shortages of foreign exchange. Any country can obtain foreign exchange through exports of goods and services, tourism, or loans from other governments or banks. The main difference in a socialist country is that all these activities are controlled by public agencies rather than private agents. In principle, this gives the public authorities greater control over the balance of trade than is possible with capitalism. Since the state has a monopoly of imports, it can curtail these in the event of shortfalls in planned export earnings. Similarly, it can control financial flows. If, for example, foreign loans can only be taken out by the state bank, then the sort of uncontrolled trade deficits financed by private borrowing that have occurred in the US and the UK in recent years will not occur. But ad hoc controls on imports may have considerable disruptive internal effects. If certain factories rely upon imported components, then curtailing imports may hold up production. Even though it may be possible to order priorities so that industrial inputs come first and consumer goods second, this inevitably means cuts in living standards when the terms of trade move against a country. The combined unpopularity of such consumer shortages and fear of economic dislocation from component shortages led certain socialist governments, Poland and Hungary in particular, to rely heavily on loans during the late 1970s. Footnote: our reasons for calling them socialist are gone into in the next chapter. End of footnote. These loans were undertaken at a time when Western banks, trying to recycle oil money, were very willing to lend. Subsequent rises in interest rates and a general deterioration of the terms of trade of the CMEA countries caused the loans to become a crippling burden on the people of these countries. In order to pay the interest, the supposedly socialist state is turned into an agency for world capital, extracting surplus value from its citizens by reducing real wages and diverting products onto the export markets. In the light of these dismal experiences, it seems wiser for socialist countries to follow Mao Zedong's policy of maintaining balanced trade and refusing to borrow money from capitalist banks. In the long run, a country can only obtain imports by exporting the products of its own labor. Either it exports them now, or it will be forced to export even more in the future to pay off loans plus interest. The international banks are not charities. They lend in the knowledge that their money will be reborn, that debts will be repaid many times over. End of section.